This is Christopher Sernaque, hosting episode 15 of season 1 of the Current Topics in Science podcast. This podcast will address breaking scientific news in light of the origins debate and host interviews with scientists. This podcast is available on the following platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Video recordings of the podcast will be uploaded to YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Today on Current Topics in Science, we have the honor of hosting Professor Mark Armitage. Professor Mark Armitage studied at Liberty University and has a Doctor of Education degree in Science Education and is a microscope specialist. He's a senior microscopist at the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute. The Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute seeks to characterize prevalence and persistence of soft tissues in dinosaur remains. The Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute carefully studies the morphology, attributes, and site locations of these original dinosaur tissues. The Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute characterizes these soft tissues, works on collaborative efforts with other tissue labs to understand dinosaur soft tissues and the molecular remains, many of which are still intact as proteins and enzymes. Professor Armitage has published papers for the Microscopy Society of America, Cambridge University Press's Microscopy Today, and Acta Histochemica, a journal of structural biochemistry, cell and tissue imaging. He's the author of the children's book, Old Stretchy, The Dinosaur Bone Cell. Now, without further ado, good morning, Professor. How was your day and how are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. It's another rainy day in Washington State, so Western Washington anyway, so I'm certainly enjoying that. How are you?
I'm doing very good, and it's good to see you this morning. And since this is Current Topics in Science, we'll quickly look at this week's current topic. News Atlas, a lifestyle, science, and technology site, recently published a paper by Michael Armitage called Not Just Boring Old Bones, 6 Incredible Dinosaur Fossils. Irving wrote, "While huge dinosaur skeletons sure look impressive, towering over us in museums, there's only so much we can learn from dusty old bones. But occasionally, more striking specimens turn up, bearing skin or feathers encased in gemstones and even preserving traces of DNA against all odds." He went on to say, "Despite what movies may tell us, DNA is far too fragile to ever be discovered from creatures that lived tens of millions of years ago. Or at least, that's what conventional thinking says. But a recent and somewhat controversial study found evidence of dinosaur DNA in fossils." So Irving, the author of the article, said in his bio that he's very interested in science. Professor Armitage, what did you think of those segments from his article, and what got you into science education?
Well, let's start with what got me into science education. I've been a microscopist for over 40 years. When I was 16 years of age and a troubled youth, my father flew me from San Juan, Puerto Rico, all the way to Portland, Maine, and I spent the summer off the coast of Portland, Maine at the National Youth Science Foundation, and we were using microscopes to look at planktonic algae and or other organisms. And so I got bit by the microscope bug, and from there I went to the University of Florida. I studied plant pathology, which required heavy use of microscopy for plant pathology. And then from there, I got hired into a laboratory at the teaching hospital, at Shands Teaching Hospital there. When I became a believer, my family threw me out of the family, so my college funding ended. So I had to go to work. So I started working in a neurosurgery laboratory, actually, at the University of Florida in the neurosurgery department. And we used Carl Zeiss operating microscopes to train practicing neurosurgeons. They would fly in from around the world and would show them how to operate on blood vessels so small that you had to use a microscope to see them, which approximates the vessels on the brain. And so from there, I was launched into a career with Olympus and Carl Zeiss and Reichert, and owned my own microscope company, but then went into academia. And so I think I built a total of 7 electron microscope labs over my career in different facilities. So I've had a lot of fun in microscopy, but now you wish me to comment on what Michael Irving has said. And I just had to chuckle because he referred to dinosaur bones as dusty old bones. And certainly some of the ones in the museums look that way. But when they come out of the ground, they're not dusty old bones. And then he said there's only so much we can learn. And I'm here to tell you, no, that's not true. We are learning so much from these dinosaur bones, and I can even make predictions. I mean, he called them dusty old bones, but they're wet bones, and I can, we're going to talk about predictions today, so I'm ready to start with another prediction, and that's a pretty bold one, but I think I stand on solid ground here. I predict that scientists are going to find nematodes, families of nematodes, populations of nematodes living inside of these dinosaur bones. In fact, the paper came out not too long ago that glowingly described the huge biome that's living inside of these dinosaur bones. So I'm going to say, yeah, okay, I agree with you because they're going after the stuff that's in there. And so I think there's nematodes in there. As far as the rest of his comment, I don't know what study he's referring to when he said there's a controversial study that found evidence of dinosaur DNA in fossils. To my knowledge, no DNA sequences have been made. I mean, there certainly is evidence of DNA and RNA. I mean, I'm finding RNA in a lot of the specimens that I test with a fluorescent tag to find the nuclear material in there. So, and other studies have shown that too. So, not complete genomes though. So we're not going to get a Jurassic Park if that's what he's referring to.
So that was very interesting. Now, Dr. Donald Batten of the University of Sydney, in an article written for Creation Ministries International, said, dinosaur blood cells, blood vessels, proteins like hemoglobin, osteocalcin, collagen and histones, and DNA are not consistent with their supposed more than 65 million year age, but make more sense if the remains are thousands of years old, at most. Professor Armitage, in a video called Soft Serve Dinosaur, you said that, I am the first to predict soft dino tissues as the norm. May you please give us insight as to the extent of the dinosaur soft tissues that you and other scientists have discovered? So in other words, is this just a few scattered findings, or is this a consistent pattern?
Oh, this is definitely a consistent pattern. I mean, we're finding dinosaur soft tissue, which I've now referred to lovingly as DST, little d, cap S, cap T. We're finding it all over the globe. In fact, Dr. Schweitzer found cells, I believe, in Gigantosaurus from Argentina, and now I think Morocco, which is where all the trilobites come from, is starting to yield soft tissue. So, no, I think this is prevalent all over the world. In our findings, well, I can talk about that in a second, but recently, just this year, Dr. Schweitzer and her team reported on chromosomes, actual chromosomes that were condensed and formed along a metaphase plate where they're going to divide. And she photographed that. And so we're finding in our specimens vein valves. I mean, the little valves that sit inside of veins, and they maintain the blood flow so that, as blood is returning to the heart, the valves close and hold that blood in place. And so we're finding the very vein valves with the little leaflets, the bicuspid leaflets. In fact, I have video of a vein valve turned on edge so you can see through into the vein valve itself. And there's a bacterium that's tagged with a fluorescent protein, and he's swimming around in there. He can't get out because both the cuspids, these are bicuspid valves, both the cuspids are closed, keeping that liquid in there. So we're finding neurons. I mean, peripheral neurons. Well, they're not really peripheral because they travel in the neurovascular bundles within the bone, but we're finding neurons. Yeah, a recent study out of Canada uh, where they collected 19 specimens. They selected 19 specimens from the Vertebrate Paleontology Laboratory Museum, and they processed all of them for soft tissue. 15 of the 19 were dinosaurian, and every single specimen yielded soft tissue, which shocked the authors. But it doesn't shock me because I think this is all over the world. And I think it's a message. I think there's a tremendous message, uh, not just for believers, but for the whole world about dinosaur soft tissue, which I'd like to get into soon in one of your questions.
That's great. Now, you actually mentioned that there's a message to believers, and we're going to get into that in this next question. According to Dr. Brian Thomas of the University of Liverpool, researchers examined 158 moat bones buried in New Zealand at different known times over the past few centuries. These bones were preserved under similar conditions and temperatures. The researchers then compared how much mitochondrial DNA survived in each specimen. From this, they calculated the rate of decay. At this rate, DNA would no longer be detectable after 65,000 years. Writing about the survival rate of collagen, he said, researchers placed bone fragments from modern cattle and humans into vials of distilled water. They kept the high temperature constant for 32 days. On a regular basis, they took samples to see how much of the collagen protein survived. From this, they calculated a rate of decay. This common protein might last several 100,000 years, but no more than 1 million. Professor Armitage, are these time frames consistent with the secular timeline or the biblical timeline?
Well, I'm going to propose that there's a real timeline, whether it's fully espoused in the Bible or not. But I believe that these labile proteins and structures won't last more than 10,000 years. I mean, I'm happy with 10,000 years, but heck, I'll give you 1,000,000 years. But here's the thing: I'm not here to debate anybody, and I think debating is really not the way we should treat each other. We should be measured in the way that we approach each other and offer the actual facts and data, and don't give way to innuendo. But even if you have 1,000,000 years, we still can't evolve all the diversity that we see on the planet today. So I think, I think these proteins, certainly the amino acids in them. I mean, that's what the lead paleontologist in this study of soft tissues and her team, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, are trying to establish. That is, that cross-links are formed in these tissues. And she's not saying all tissues. She's going after this systematically. And right now, all she's focused on are the vessels, the blood vessels, not the vein valves that we're finding, or the neuron, the neural tissue, the neural bundles, and the veins and the arteries. She's looking at the vessels, the blood vessels. And she's saying that Fenton reactions because of iron are causing this cross-linking. And we'll get into that more. But the real message of dinosaur soft tissue, because it does envelop it does envelop the globe, sorry. Dinosaur soft tissue does envelop the globe. It means that the flood event has been validated. All of these things look like they drowned by asphyxiation. In fact, we're studying the blood clotting. And maybe I'm going to give away the story here, which I don't want to do, but we're studying the fact that disseminated intravascular coagulation happens as a result of hypoxia with drowning. I mean, it's a response that the blood activates thrombosis, and so we're seeing a lot of clots in these dinosaur bones, and so we think they all drowned in a flood, or at least in an aqueous slurry of mud that they were buried in, and it happened globally. And so everybody knows that soft tissue is not going to last more than 10,000 years. I mean, we know this innately. Just throw a chicken leg out in the front yard and come back in 3 months. We know, we've all had goldfish die in an aquarium and watch it, decompose quickly if we don't get it out of there. So we know soft tissue doesn't last as a people. And so it's shocking to find it in these specimens. And the further back we go, I mean, we're looking at some specimens that are 240 million years old, and we're seeing red blood cells, and we're seeing osteocytes that look like they're grown in a petri dish. So, I mean, even the further back you go on this, geologic time scale, the almost the better the preservation gets in the specimens that we've examined. So, we're anxious to get all over the world and dig all over the world and show that this is prevalent everywhere. But man, if the flood is real, then Genesis is real. It's real history. You asked the question about secular timeline or biblical timeline. There's just a real historical timeline. And when we dig in the earth and we find these soft tissues, we're looking at the real timeline. And the timeline is less than 10,000 years. I'll give you a million. Let's say it's less than a million years old. But there was a global event that happened to everybody on the planet. Now, surprise, surprise, we're living through a global event, that is threatening the existence of the entire planet. It's a wake-up call. And I think people should look at dinosaur soft tissue and realize there was a huge global event that killed everything. And if Genesis is validated because of dinosaur soft tissue, we all belong to the same family. We all came from the same original male and female that God put on the planet. So we're all brothers and sisters. So why be contentious with each other? Some of us in the family have strayed away from the fold. Let's go gently get those folks and say, hey, look at the real message of dinosaur soft tissue and come on back.
Amen. I appreciate how you actually tied the gospel into the dinosaur soft tissue idea. Now, actually, you did mention something that's going to be the next question. You mentioned iron preservation. Now, in order to get around the timeline implications from the discovery of soft tissues, some scientists have tried to claim that it's possible for these soft tissues to have been preserved for millions of years. Dr. Elizabeth Mitchell of Vanderbilt University wrote, "Iron may paradoxically be the key," claim evolutionist researchers, "to preserving dinosaur soft tissue for evolution's assumed millions of years." Professor Armitage, do any of these ideas work in preserving the soft tissue for the millions of years needed for the evolutionary timeline?
Well, that's a great question. You have to understand that my training is as a tissue processing expert. Okay? When I got my master's degree in parasitology, I studied under Dr. Richard Lumsden, who was dean of the graduate school at Tulane University and a world-class electron microscopist. And so you can't just throw any old tissue under the microscope. You have to process it, and you have to process it carefully because you'll introduce error, which you don't see until later on. My master's degree was in parasitology, and I was working with tiny little microscopic parasitic worms that are translucent. You can only see them under the microscope. And so I would process them. These were worms that cycled as parasites through snails and fish and birds. So that was their life cycle. It was fascinating. But these worms were so tiny and so delicate that it wasn't until I spent 80 or 100 hours working on the specimens, and then I got them under the electron microscope and realized, oh, wow, I knocked all their heads off because I brushed up against something. See, so these tissues are very labile. We know they don't last. So we're searching for a preservation mechanism because I don't understand why they are still here. After 1,000 years, these should have turned to dust. And so a lot of things come to mind, but we're trying to find the truth. We're not trying to get around anything. We're trying to find the truth about why these are still here. And it's difficult to explain. Now, 2 preservation theories have been proposed. One, which I think is the more likely one, is the one that proposes that sugars, complex carbohydrates, get broken down and they kind of fall in and decay on each other. They become advanced glycation end products, and so they turn kind of black and brown. And we see a lot of this in the bones. We see a lot of black and soft tissue. And if you read the forensics literature, they talk about grave wax. These lipids, these fats in the body, just sort of congeal and become kind of a grave wax, and they turn brown over time. So we do see that, and I think I see that as probably the more probable way to keep these cells, which are bound by phospholipid membranes. Remember, cells are just coated in fat; they just kind of collapse on themselves. But all the beauty and all the softness, I have freed these vessels. I've liberated them from the bone and had them in aqueous solution. And you put them in a drop on a slide, and you put a cover slip on top of that, and then you put a drop of oil and a lens on top of that, and you can actually put pressure on the cover slip, and you can watch these cells, floating around and moving their filopodia because they're all soft. So they haven't hardened, they haven't permineralized, they're still soft. They're just kind of desiccated, but why are they still here? And so the advanced glycation end product theory is one, and then the other is the preservation via Fenton reactions that are caused by free iron that is liberated from the erythrocytes, the red blood cells. And so the latest study, the first study that Dr. Schweitzer and her team did in 2013, they basically soaked ostrich vessels in hemoglobin that had been taken from chickens and ostriches. But what they didn't tell you in the paper pro per, you had to go to the supplemental materials to find this out. But the first thing they did was put an anticoagulant in the blood so that it wouldn't coagulate. Okay, now I didn't see that happen in Hell Creek. I didn't see somebody with a big syringe injecting dinosaurs with anticoagulants as they drowned and decayed under these mud flows. But that's what they did to prevent the clotting. Why? Well, you have to get the heme out of the hemoglobin, and you can't do that if it's clotted. And then it was centrifuged multiple times at 5,000 RPM or higher. And that was to remove all the white cells and the platelets. And then they removed the plasma, they removed the serum and all the factors and cofactors that are contingent on the blood clotting cascade, thrombosis, okay, forming of plasma. They took all that stuff out of the blood, and then they soaked vessels in it for 2 years and looked at them and said, oh, wow, look, okay, not a great experiment, right? But the latest experiment, which is December of 2019, okay, now it's Boatman et al. And but same team basically took vessels from chicken collagen, and they soaked it not in hemoglobin this time, but in a solution of ferrite. And I can't remember the exact compound name right now, but it was soaked in an iron solution. And cross-links did form, okay? Cross-links in the structural proteins of the vessel, cross-links did form as a result of these scrubbing bubbles. But when you put free iron into a body, it's like spraying it with scrubbing bubbles, okay? Picture the scrubbing bubble like Pac-Man just going through and chewing up all the soft tissue, where the hope is that as it's chewing up the soft tissue, it's going to prevent some of the things from decaying, and it'll form these crosslinks that somehow, some way, as this soft tissue is covered in iron, concretions through deep time, it's preserved. Well, I'm asking, is it sufficient? Is that a sufficient explanation? And by the way, it doesn't explain the preservation of vein valves. It doesn't explain the preservation of nerves. It doesn't explain the preservation of osteocytes. So we're looking for a mechanism. I think scientists are doing the best they can do, but so far they don't really, I don't think they're sufficient to explain the wild, fantastic preservation that we are seeing in these specimens.
Actually, in a video called Dinosaur Tissue Remnants, ? You said, as far as I can tell, my laboratory is the only creationist laboratory in the world actually doing this work. Professor Armitage, in the same video, you went on to say, these soft tissue cells show us that the Bible is true and can be trusted from the very beginning. So Professor Armitage, like you were saying, it sounds like this is an important issue to scientists, and the discovery of soft tissue in dinosaurs is important for the biblical worldview. And so what progress would you like to see in the line of research pertaining to soft tissues?
Well, it is important. It's important for life, as we discussed. This is the most powerful evidence that we have. Whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist, as a scientist, it's the best evidence we have that validates the global flood. And so I think it needs to be investigated. Now, this is a career killer. There aren't many people studying this. And in my case, I was running $1 million laboratory in the biology department of California State University in Northridge. And we had 3 electron microscopes and plenty of fluorescent microscopes. And we had a $500,000 confocal microscope. And I was trained not only to build this lab, which was in a brand new $52 million, I think, a brand new chaparral hall, a brand new science building on campus. And I was at the top floor. It was like the jewel, for the department. And I was trained to build this lab, to run and maintain it, and to train PhDs and graduate students and undergraduates in the use of the equipment. So, but I lost my career as a result of studying this. So more work does need to be done, and that's the whole point of DISTRI. The Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute is incorporated, and it's a 501c3 organization, and we're chartered in the state of Texas. And so, right now we have a rudimentary lab, but just look on the website, look at all the new discoveries that we're making, and I'll tell you, there's some that are coming down the pike that are just going to flat blow your mind. You're not going to believe the stuff that we're going to show you. But this is an organization that anybody can come into. This is not about me. It's not about some, whatever. It's about the science. And so we want to build a brick and mortar building. And, there are folks in Hollywood right now that could write a check for $30 million. And that's the kind of foundation that we need, to build a brick and mortar laboratory with different departments, the molecular biology department, you do a radiochronology department and do carbon dating. There's so many things you can do with these dinosaur bones to test them and understand them. So, we would like to see funding come in and growth, and we'd like to bring in the most capable people of faith that we can find and build an organization that can do this work and show the world, hey, you're walking around on a carpet of dinosaur soft tissue. And you know what? There's a second judgment coming. And we want you as members of our family, the Adam and Eve family, to know, hey, you're in danger. In fact, a lot of millennials are really worked up about climate change and temperature changes across. Well, the scripture tells us, 2 Peter 3 says, don't forget, that to the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years is like a day. But the Lord is not slow in keeping his promise. He's not talking about creation, brothers and sisters in Adam and Eve. Okay? He's talking about the judgment to come. And he goes on to say that the elements are going to melt in the heat. The whole world is going to be destroyed by fire. The heavens are going to disappear with a roar. Right? This is coming. Are you ready for it? Dinosaur soft tissue is proof this happened once before, and God promised another judgment. It's on its way. So that's our message. That's our message, pure and simple. Come into the fold, live life the way God intended for you to live it, free of worry, full of trust in him, full of his providence and supply. He's taking care of so many people right now. He's taking care of me in this COVID-19 pandemic. You can trust him. He's trustworthy. And here's the evidence. So we encourage you to study it and look into it. And, go to our website. All the videos are there. We give everything away for free. We don't sell anything. We give it away. Okay? It's meant to be given away. Go on our website. Right now is a great time to download a copy of our book, Old Stretchy the Dinosaur Bone Cell, and sit around as a family. Print it off on your printer. It's a PDF. Print it off. It's a book. Sit around and read it with the kids.
That actually leads us now to our final question. Now, according to Dr. Brian Thomas, dinosaur soft tissue leaves the evolutionary paradigm, which must have millions of years in order to achieve even remote plausibility, between a rock and a hard place. However, the dinosaur blood cells and vessels fit perfectly into the biblical history of the world, which indicates that man and dinosaurs were both created on the same day in the relatively recent past. Professor Armitage, for someone who's been convicted by the evidences presented today, what can they do to learn more about how science confirms the Word of God?
Well, they can go to our website for sure. We try to keep our materials consistent up there. There's 3, I think, of the published papers, and you have access to all of our videos. Besides, there's another YouTube channel. Well, the first YouTube channel is Mark H. Armitage. So, there's something like 70 videos there. I think the very first one goes back to 2017 when I had just peeled that tissue off the inside of the Triceratops horn. Okay, I cracked it open and peeled this away, and it was stretchy. I was stretching it under the microscope, and I just ran and got my camera and turned it on. This was 2012, and started recording. So all the videos from that day are there. You can watch the whole progression and how it changed me, and the many things that we've learned. But look, I want to point something out, which I think we really need as believers to pay attention to, and that is this idea of evolution being between a rock and a hard place. Who cares about evolution? Okay, this is not about evolution. This is about real history, real science, real data. Feed the need, not the controversy. Okay, the controversy is the debate. Let's debate about evolution. Now, feed the need. What's the need? We need to know that we're loved by a creator. My whole life changed. I was an evolutionist. I was a trained evolutionist at the University of Florida. And I dragged my evolution into my Christianity with me, kicking and screaming. And when I found out about the science that showed that these things are not as old as we think they are, I had to find out everything about it that I could. And so I started that journey way back in 1977. So it's brought me to this point. But feed the need. The need is to be loved by a creator God. The need is to know that we have a future. The need is to know that I'm safe today. And Jesus, all he ever said was, follow me. Just follow him. And then you look the way he lived his ministry. You just walk the walk. It's a walk. You just walk with him. And you learn every day. You grow every day. You get closer every day. And before you know it, you turn around and you go, wow, look at the road, the narrow road that you walked me down, Lord. So my invitation is, come on the road. It's wonderful.
Amen. And Professor Armitage, thank you very much for your time. It was an absolute joy.
Thank you.
Well, you're more than welcome. To our listeners, thank you for taking the time to learn with us on current topics in science, where scientific discoveries are examined in light of the origins debate. Please share and subscribe to the Current Topics in Science podcast. It's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can find Professor Armitage's research at the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute's website, which is provided in the description, along with Professor Armitage's personal YouTube channel. Thanks again for listening, and remember, the truth saves.